Welcome to McKinsey Live. Today's moderator is Lucia Rahili.
Hello and welcome to McKinsey Live. I'm Lucia Rahili, McKinsey's editorial director, and your host for today's event, How CEOs Learn to Lead from the Inside Out. Quick note as we get rolling, the goal of this series is to give you the opportunity to engage with our experts in their latest research. So if you are registered for this event, please use the Q&A functionality to ask anything that comes to mind. More engagement is always a plus in our view. Today, leadership. It's tough in any era, but today's CEOs arguably confront the toughest operating environment, if not ever, then at least in recent memory. Joining us to talk about what it means to learn to lead amid this relentless complexity are Donna Maor and Kurt Strovink. Donna and Kurt are co-authors of a new book that publishes today, called The Journey of Leadership. The book offers some super practical, actionable lessons from the experiences of CEOs, including a couple dozen CEO stories that many of you will be unlikely to have heard before. So visit our website or any online bookseller for more. Donna is also a senior partner and global co-lead of our people and organizational performance practice. And she works with a broad range of clients across sectors and across continents to transform their organizations and the leaders themselves. And Kurt is a senior partner. He's a member of McKinsey's board of directors, and he is global leader of our CEO Special Initiative. He serves clients at the intersection of strategy, personal leadership, mission building, and enterprise transformation. Donna and Kurt, welcome to McKinsey Live.
It's wonderful to be here, Lucia. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Looking forward to the conversation.
And hey, congratulations on the book. It's so exciting. So let's start with what's at stake now in leading well, right? And here I'm thinking that over the years, McKinsey has developed research on the importance of leadership that suggests organizations with top quartile leaders generate 3.5 times higher shareholder returns. But here's the thing, that's not necessarily new. Certainly, we would all agree that good leadership is better than the alternative, and much has been written about leadership in the past. Kurt, tell us about the impetus for this book and why it felt pressing to write now at this particular juncture.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple different reasons why we decided to write this book now, and we thought it might be a contribution to leadership, modern leadership in our time. I guess one reason is that there's a lot changing in the world at once. So there's a ton happening, whether it's geopolitics, climate considerations, diversity and inclusion, supply chain disruption, all sorts of different kinds of transformational elements happening, pressure from the macro environment, et cetera. And our general experience has been with leaders, and particularly with CEOs that we spent time with, that if maybe 5 or 7 years ago, people were focusing on 5 or 6 things, it now feels like double that number, like 10 or 12 that really occupy the attention of senior folks. And so I think that one reason we did this is that the environment is becoming much more complex, and it's multifaceted, and it has many things going on at once. I think a second reason we focus on this book was we have a laboratory of sort of leadership in very small groups with our McKinsey Bauer Forum, which is a group of CEOs that we bring together in groups of 3 or 4, and we've been doing this for about 10 years. And so we have 500 CEOs who have learned in smaller groups with each other in peer learning formats that we've helped convene and orchestrate. And we just had insights after a 10-year period in how some of the most senior leaders learned. And what was coming out of that was that a lot of it was about the human side of leadership, and not just the technocratic side of leadership. It was about how they learn to govern themselves as they learn to lead others. And so that became one of the key aspects or the key thesis of the book itself. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, today. But the second reason is we thought we had something of a unique data set and maybe something to say on this topic. And then I think the third thing we'd say is we didn't think this was about CEOs. We thought it was a particular group of CEOs that gave a lot of learning and examples, but we've also seen through many of our other convening of CXOs and other leaders throughout organizations. This common theme. And so we wanted to share that too. So the book is meant really about the journey of leadership, about learning, about the process of discovery and refinement and practice. And it's for all leaders as opposed to just CEOs. So those are some of the reasons, Lucia, that we decided to write the book.
Super helpful. And so for so many of us, CEOs and aspiring leaders alike, that inner journey that you're describing, that human side of leadership and governing oneself, is almost the harder of the journeys to undertake, particularly when there are so many externally driven choices to be made about what needs to be done. CEOs confront so many exigencies every day. So Donna, talk to us about the how then of this inner journey. What if you're combined, thousands of hours spent working closely with CEOs and other leaders taught you about how to handle what Kurt just described as the complexity and the intensity of modern management?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's not a traditional top-down command and control, one line, easy answer. I mean, that's for sure. Because the only way to be able to handle the complexity and the speed and the multi-stakeholders in this world is to do something different. And a linear approach would just not do that. And so what we've seen in all the conversations that we've been having is that the what was actually something that for experienced leaders, not only CEOs, was relatively easy to find. It is the how. And in many cases, leaders really needed to unlearn management. It's not about management, but to relearn how to actually show up as a full human being in whatever organization that they're leading. And that actually requires, first and foremost, that they dig deep into themselves to understand who they are as a person. And that is difficult because it means that you need to make time to actually focus on you. And most leaders don't do that when there's so much pressure. There's so many things to do. There's so many people to lead and take care of. The intuition and the immediate reaction is to actually put yourself in the service of others, in the service of the organization, roll up your sleeves and work. And actually, the first thing that you need to do is find a way to dig deep into yourself and figure out who is it that you are. And some of the traits are obvious. You need to be confident. You need to be resilient. You need to be versatile, even though versatility is not having different contexts, but actually being able to navigate different traits. Others are less obvious, being vulnerable, being humble. And so you need to bring these together and understand who you are, what drives you, what are your sources of strength and energy, and what are your areas that might be less strong, that you might want to work on, the fears that you need to confront. And then you can apply your skills to lead others, inspire, set sense of purpose, take bold action. And the thing is, each and every one of them on their own sound obvious. The real challenge is in how do you bring it all together, and what is that mastery that you have in navigating through all the competing tensions, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, short-term goals, long-term goals, people, being humble and confident, make a decision, but also empower others. So all that needs to come together in knowing how to lead yourself and knowing how to lead others.
Right. So as you're describing this, sounds like a big challenge. And also, as I heard you say, it's not the default setting for most leaders to take on all these imperatives that are not in service of the organization or the team. So help us understand what this looks like actually in practice. Is there a leader today, for example, who you think does this particularly well that might embody for our audience what this looks like?
Look, you'll see in the book that there are a lot of stories of people who have gone through this learning journey. And if there's one message, is that this is a forever learning journey. Nobody can be perfect, and there's always more to learn and experience. But one story that sticks with me from the book as we talk about this is Bruno Fister from Swiss Life. He moved from the CFO role to the CEO role exactly as the financial world crumbled in 2008, which means suddenly there's a very different environment, there's immense stress, there's uncertainty, and he needed to stabilize and turn around a company that was not struggling before, but in the new context is struggling. And his first instinct was to seek guidance, which is what we say. We say you need to be humble, you need to listen to others. But the feedback that he got was, don't think about the moment, think about the legacy that you want to leave in the company. And that was a surprise to him. I'm like, what are you talking about? I have a company that is struggling and I need to think about legacy right now. But actually, when he reflected on that, that gave him the perspective that helped him create the vision. And one can say, okay, wonderful. So you have the vision, you know exactly what you're doing. That's it, right? He was on a roll and he knew where to take it. But the reality was that even when his vision talked about entrepreneurship, talked about empowering others, because of the situation of the company, he was very nervous to let go of control. And another chapter in the book speaks about control as an illusion. And he felt that as a CEO, of course, other people will make decisions, but he needs to be in the details. He needs to know exactly what's happening. And it's only when his management team started to push back very hard that he had that moment where we talk about balancing confidence and humility. He had a conversation with self and recognized that maybe he's wrong. And the only thing that would happen if he admitted he was wrong is that potentially, not necessarily, his ego may be bruised. And when he realized that, and that the centralization of that nature would not work for the organization, had a conversation with his management team, admitted that that was not the right answer for this organization at that moment in time. And from there, you could see a pivot in the organization. So that I am confident, I know how to lead, I know what my vision and legacy is. I think I need to be all over this, but actually I learned that I shouldn't. Of course, risk management was managed from the center. This moment of confronting your ego and very courageously saying, you know what, I actually need to change things. It's one story that to me brings together selflessness, humility, listening to others, but also the resilience and the versatility to change your way of action when you realize that things need to be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's super useful in helping to bring these lessons to life. We've got a flood of questions here about similar things. You know, how does this knowledge of self translate in a very practical way into better organizational leadership? Kurt, who would you hold up for us as an example here?
Yeah, I mean, I would add a story actually from Wendy Kopp, who was herself a founder of Teach for America and then Teach for All. Teach for All being the international version of Teach for America. And she, as many people will know, she set up, effectively coming out of college, an approach and an organization that got really talented young teachers into public school systems. I had the opportunity to be on the national board of Teach for America for a number of years and saw her at close range. And Wendy's quite a force of nature and an amazing leader in so many ways. But one of the elements of her leadership that we talk about in the book is about how she built up this real method of how to get educational attainment in the U.S. public school system through teachers and the core curriculum and a lot of training with the teachers in the U.S. But as she shifted then to a broader aspiration to try to take this to 60 other countries around the world with local customs and different contexts, how Wendy herself dealt with letting go a little bit from the concept of having principles that she knew worked in the US and a particular method, which was very, very sacrosanct in the US, and actually engaged a number of local chapters in different countries around the world to try to create solutions that would work as well in those countries as Teach for America had worked in America. And the reason we highlight that example is there's many things you could focus on for Wendy's leadership, but the idea of, for somebody who's so gifted at synthesizing and creating a method, and it was so important to proselytize around this in the U.S. about what would make this really stick in the public school system, what we had to do with teachers to encourage that, to release that agenda a little bit and learn how to empower others in different contexts was a difficult emotional thing to do. And she managed that quite with a lot of self-awareness and a lot of dignity. And doing that has actually led to a lot of impact that she wouldn't have had she forced a US model, however right it was in the US, on the rest of the world. And there's lots of local contexts. In India, for example, this, has been very successful, and there's different circumstances there. The government doesn't pay local teachers. There had to be a different approach with fundraising and even lobbying the government to do things differently in terms of policy. So there was other surrounding elements that were different in terms of context. But the main thing that we're drawing attention to here is this journey for her of something that was the reason for it working in one country and being willing to step back, take counsel, and empower others, learn. And back to the point that Dana mentioned, just have the versatility and empowerment to try to get an additional kind of value in different contexts. And that's hard for leaders to grow. It's easier to replicate what you've already done than to evolve it. And we think she's a great example of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of complementary examples in a way, right? Because they're both engaging this interesting jujitsu about understanding your own propensity for control, but then actually relinquishing it to empower others to move into new markets and create growth, as you described. Donna, what can leaders do right now to instill this kind of human-centric leadership in their own lives and in the institutions they lead?
Look, it's obviously a journey. And so whatever I say now may be right for some, not right for others, or will evolve over time. But if some of the things that we think that everybody should do, one is you have to take the time to reflect. And I know that it feels indulgent, as I said earlier, but it is very, very important to do that. So I would start with a self-assessment and think about what truly drives me? What is my passion? Where is my energy? And what are those things that, to Kurt's point, maybe who I was as a leader up to this point, but they are no longer serving me. The other thing is to actually seek feedback from others. We talk about constructing your own board, and the board does not mean the management board in the organization. It means people who know you, people who you trust, people who you think will call on things when they need to be called, where you can have a very open conversation and have that self-reflection with them as well and hear them out. Same as this mentor that Bruno reached out to. I think that learning also is something very important. You need to focus on few skills at one point in time, and it doesn't have to be something that has to do with the work. Learning anything new that is different is going to open up a very different way to look at life. I spent a week in Singularity University. I loved it, right? It opened up a lot of creativity space for me and what I do. And I think that people need to always think about ways to broaden the reference base. And then understanding where your purpose comes from is super, super important. Of course, it was easy for Stefan Bancel at Moderna when we had to find a vaccine for the world. That's a very understandable source of inspiration, but that drove him to take very bold decisions. And when his head of manufacturing said, "You're crazy, we cannot manufacture all that," he said, "Well, what do you need from me to do that, to make that happen? Because we have to make that happen, there's no question." And so that question of what do you need to make that happen rather than can we make that happen, I find very, very helpful. And I actually try to apply it myself. And then the last thing I would say, just play with your operating model, cultivate different practices, physical, mental, spiritual, your sleeping habits. I take yoga every morning, whatever that might be, that gives you that space to think, try something different, be unskilled at something and get better at it. That's going to already develop the muscle of being more comfortable with not always being the one with the answers, but actually looking for others. So those are some of the things that I would talk about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Kurt, anything to add there about leadership behaviors that really show results over time?
Yeah, I think that you can practice in a variety of ways. In fact, we have in the book about 100 micro practices that we talk about that are divided into self and leading teams and then leading organizations. And some of the things that we've discovered from the many executives that we've worked with and the CEOs in this book. But I would say there's a couple things that we see as patterns in organizations that are starting to really do this. One is to really think about we call it a more systemic way to assess team effectiveness, but to really think about the chemistry of the team, the ways in which you as a leader are responsible for that chemistry, not just the mechanics of pulling a team together or people reporting to you individually. How do you create a team that has more strength than any of its parts? There's also a question just of how you reach out to external stakeholders and how do you engage them. You can learn a lot from other industries, and you can also role model for your organization what it means to build learning capabilities. I often find it quite interesting that many of the leaders that we profiled, they often think about analogies in other areas, other adjacencies outside of their own contexts. I think they're looking for inspiration, but also ways to import that and bring that back into their own companies. And analogies are powerful ways in which people get unfrozen, think new thoughts, and learn to lead their organizations in new ways. It's kind of an unfreezing moment, and we see leaders take advantage of that. I think you can do that institutionally in companies. And then we also talk about a few other things here around emphasizing values and purpose in the organization and really trying to make sure there's a distinctive story around that. we do observe that leaders that hit their stride have not only a personal, authentic set of values and purpose, but they've translated that usually into some proprietary vocabulary in organizations about why we're here and what we do. And sometimes we talk about the 4 W's of leadership. We talk about, kind of who, why, what, when. And we do find that sometimes leaders will power past those first 2 W's about the who and the why to get to what we need to do and when we need to do it. And that can be a weakness in terms of opening people up, especially in talent-driven, self-directed organizations. You can get a lot of energy from focusing on purpose and institutionalizing that and really making those stories come to life and spotlighting, great behavior that ties to that. So those are some of the things that we see when we lift the frame from self to the organizations overall. But it all involves this final point of trying to balance this inherent tension, making yourself almost psychologically conditioned to be able to do it first, and then exploring how to get some of these intersections we've been talking about in the organizations at large.
Okay, so super interesting insight. Lots to learn there for all of us, even as we started those who are not CEOs, but who are continuing to evolve on their own leadership journey. I am mindful of time, and we have had a deluge of questions from our audience here. So let's field a selection of those now. I'm going to start, it wouldn't be the year 2024 if we did not take a question on Gen AI. Many to choose from here, but let's just take it at a high level. How is Gen AI likely to affect folks in CEO and other leadership level roles? Donna, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I think first and foremost, we just did our own research and saw that in organizations, employees are well ahead of the organization. What I mean by that is 91% of employees said that they're actually already using Gen AI, but as individuals. But when we asked them about the organization, only 13% said that their organizations deployed more than one use case that they could see as individuals. And that means that it's here. It's happening, it's here, it's going to impact us, and therefore your question is very much in the right place. And by the way, when I say Gen AI, I talk about AI at large, because typically that is the technology that pulls through a lot of other technologies as well. And I'm sure that in a year we will have something else that is going to be the next challenge. If anybody is afraid of Gen AI or AI, what we say is, look, the reality is that it's just going to augment. So, augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, those human traits that we were just talking about. And the reason is that when we look at people, they say, of course, I'm comfortable learning a skill from Gen AI because that is a systemic thing. How do I develop a software? How do I use a new tool? But they are even more in search of the human qualities in their management teams because some other things that are more technical they can do otherwise. And what leaders need to think about is they bring the context, they sense what is happening, they bring the awareness, and then Gen AI can bring some of the content that goes with that. They need to know what questions to ask. And again, Gen AI will answer that and bring some options, but somebody needs to be wise in discerning that and make that relevant to the current context and organization. And lastly, there's no replacement yet for the heart, for the empathy, and for the human skills that are what we are. And when we have no sense of purpose and belonging, many of us are not excited about the organizations that we're in, and that is not something that any leader can afford to lose.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very helpful. Okay, I'm going to toggle here to a more tactical question. There are a few questions on these micro habits, Kurt, that you alluded to earlier in our conversation. A request to say more, since micro habits are maybe by definition smaller and therefore perhaps easier to adopt than some other behaviors. Give us some specifics, Kurt, on the micro habits that you feel could be most beneficial to leaders. What did you see in your work with these CEOs?
Well, it's all about this, their central thesis of kind of learning to govern yourself and really creating the awareness, the conditioning, sometimes the temperament in yourself to be able to relax and see the world that's working around you and be able to react and create habits and practice around that. So a couple examples really specifically would be, one is just practicing active listening in different situations as a leader can be incredibly important. it can open up people to do the same, and then more voices are heard. Sometimes it can be important to think just tactically about what is my question to answer ratio in this meeting, and you would often find, how do I make it a 3-to-1 question to answer ratio as a leader in a meeting, as an example, right? And often we find that it's 1-to-4, or it's 1-to-6, or 1-to-10 or something. And I think even reversing that, subtle as it is, can have a huge effect on others around you, the role that you're playing, the degree to which you're opening up people to think and question. And I think that's one example of active listening. Another might be to really be a proactive coach to folks in an organization, to think about who are the 5 people you want to coach in your organization. And by the way, make sure at least half of them don't report to you. So they're a different part of the organization that you're helping build, and you're doing something that is selfless, and you're not just evaluating them on a task that they did, but maybe you're asking them at the beginning something like, what's the one thing I can watch for you for your professional development, your growth? And then take notes for a month or two, and then have a meeting and share a synthesis that's beautiful for them. I mean, something like that would be another example of a micro practice on coaching that can have huge cascading implications for people who don't always get a lot of feedback. And when they do get it, it tends to be transactional, as opposed to something that's a bit more holistic. So those would be a couple examples. I mean, another one is, and this is subtle, but I think we all need to develop modes and methods to not be triggered when something gets us, right? And I think there's a lot of different ways of doing that. Sometimes people they have a pact with themselves that they're going to pause for 5 or 7 seconds. They're going to ask a question, maybe one of the ones we talked about earlier, just to allow, their brains to reset and the emotional side of them not to react. Others will have a discipline of not sending emails that are challenging at the end of the night, and sleep on it before sending it in the morning. And in most cases, you can do that, maybe with a little bit of lost time, but it's probably worth it. In fact, one of the stories that is interesting to me, as I've thought more about this, Lincoln used to get really upset with his generals during the Civil War, and he really wanted to move faster and attack quicker, etc. And he had this pact, or this habit that he created, where he wrote letters to the generals, and he decided in the morning, is he going to send them? And you know what? He never sent any of those letters to the generals, but he wrote them all and he stuck them in his desk drawer. And I often think, if he had to create that kind of habit, Abraham Lincoln, somebody we revere for his temperament, what do the rest of us have to do to create habits in our own lives to not overreact to things? And maybe part of the reason we remember him for his great temperament was because he had those habits. And so we're looking for those kinds of things as part of the micro habits in the book.
Yeah, certainly many of us have learned the benefits of save in draft before sending. Okay, thank you. That brings us to time, unfortunately, but this has been such a great discussion. Donna and Kurt, thanks again for joining me in the McKinsey Live audience today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks very much. And we both have pianos in the background. I think Dana's missing her piano. That's the only...
I'm in the office, so no piano in the office.
If we had planned this differently, Kurt, we could have...
Yeah, we would have been able to do something. I know you've got Eric Satie on the back. I can see the music, etc. Anyway, thank you so much for leading us, Lucia.
Thank you. And as always, many thanks to all of you watching today. You'll be able to find a replay of this session and previous McKinsey Lives at mckinsey.com/live. And don't forget to check out The Journey of Leadership, either on our website or at one of your favorite online booksellers, or, one of your favorite IRL booksellers. Again, it is available today. Finally, join us for our next McKinsey Live, which is on Tuesday, October 1st. We're going to feature some super interesting research from McKinsey's Institute for Black Economic Mobility on the relevance of place, which, is where you live, and how it's relevant to racial equity and prosperity. So you can use that magical QR code on your screen right now to register for this next event. See you there, and have a great day or evening. Be well.